In 1950, the world woke up to a new material that has revolutionized the materials handling market. Known as plastics, it was designed to replace traditional materials like glass, wood, and paper, due to some amazing characteristics it has. In less than 100 years of usage, a huge environmental problem has been identified, almost tarnishing the benefits of plastics over the years. Some of the negative impacts of plastics include filthy communities, leakages into water bodies, and effects on the food chain. Are plastics an example of a good servant and bad master? Trash Talk will look at the issues of plastics and how stakeholders, through a participatory process, can bring and promote sustainable solutions. What is the government's policy on plastic production and disposal? Should we attempt banning plastics as Rwanda has? How should we address the plastic waste menace in Ghana? Do we have the enabling policies to support banning or recycling? What can we do as individuals and as a collective? Join us on the first episode of Trash Talk. After the break, we will delve deeper into the issues. You're welcome back to Trash Talk. Today we have an expert panel of people who are interested in environmental sanitation, particularly plastics. I want to start my introduction from Mr. Israel Acheampong of the Africa Environmental Sanitation Consult. It's a research outfit of Ghana, where they research into everything environmental, health, and sanitation. I'll move on to the other lady on the panel, who is Madame Adwoa Coleman. Adwoa Coleman is with Dow Chemical, and she'll tell us a bit about what Dow Chemical does. And then to my immediate right, we have Mr. Kingsley Bekoe with United Nations Development Program. You are welcome to this program.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, madam.
I want us to start talking about plastics. What is the excitement about plastics globally? And then, of course, locally. Well, I will start with Kingsley.
Thank you very much, Abena, for the question. I would say that plastics have played a very significant role in the life of humans in terms of packaging and the way we store goods, but also because of the nature of the production of plastics and the way they are managed, it has had quite a significant impact on the environment. And I think that is the reason why we're having all this excitement. But more importantly, I think over the last 20 to 30 years, the rate of production of plastic materials has increased significantly. And as a result, its impact also on the environment has been very severe. And that is why we are having all this excitement about plastics.
It only makes a lot of logic for me to pick on Adwoa at this moment. Since you are into virgin plastic production, Adwoa, tell us, what is the position of plastics around the world?
So honestly, I can pick up from where Kingsley started. You know, he spoke about the fact that plastics offer benefits in terms of packaging materials and moving goods. However, when we say plastics, we're talking about a very diverse set of materials, right? We have plastics within textiles, we have plastics within electronics, we have plastics within several parts of our cars. We have plastics everywhere.
Indeed, our mobile phones and all.
And there is a reason for this.
Right.
And the reason is that this material was made to be versatile, it was made to last, and was also made to be cost effective.
Okay.
And so in looking at the properties of the material, why wouldn't you use it for almost everything around you, right? It's the question you need to ask yourself.
It's an exciting prospect. What can we do without? I want to cast my mind into a medical setting, for instance, and think about what we would do in a hospital, for instance, without plastics. But that brings me to the point of what's the situation of plastics in Ghana?
Okay, well, in Ghana, trying to look at the data, we are saying, and even then, you realize that we are giving estimations, and which means there's some kind of research gap. But the data we have says that we are generating close to 800,000 to about 1 million tons per annum. And maybe to bring it down, a ton will be like 20 of the 50 kilogram bag. So multiply it by that, realize that you're talking about around 20 million bags of, comparative to cement or to rice, being spilled into the country on a daily basis as a result of our use for economic activities and then other things we could talk about, just like we've explained. So that's how the situation looks like.
Are we then, can we, and this is to all of you, can we then say that we have become first a continent or a country addicted to the use of plastics, but not particularly committed to the disposal of plastics? From UNDP's point of view?
Yes, you can say that. And I want to follow up on where Israel left. If you look at how much plastics we are producing, actually, and the way we are managing plastics, out of the amount that we produce, only 14% is actually managed properly and collected. Another 38% is dumped in places that you would normally call informal dump sites that you have in communities and all that. Another 11% is burnt openly, and another 4% is buried in the ground. And of course, if you look at how much we are collecting and how much we are actually not able to collect, so we collect properly only 14% of the plastics that we produce, and the rest then ends up in our water bodies, in the environment, making the environment not clean. Some of them also even end up with our fish and even in our food chains. So you could go to the market and be buying fish, and some of the plastics have been consumed by the fish because they ended up in the ocean. And there are a lot of chemicals that come with plastics in terms of the composition, and that ends up with the fish. You eat the fish, and those chemicals end up in your system, and that is why we have a lot of diseases that can be attributed to the way that we manage plastic. So in terms of the management, we are not doing too well with that, and that is why we are having this challenge.
I'm sure the producer of virgin plastics will tell us that we are either failing or we are not. But was plastics or plastics, are they created to cause harm to us? Adwoa?
Certainly not. Plastic was created as a beneficial material, as mentioned before. And the issues that we're seeing and the discussions we're having is around the fact that post-use, the material is ending up in the environment, and this is unacceptable, right? So we're speaking about the Ghanaian context, but across Africa, on average, over 90% of all of the municipal solid waste generated ends up in the environment or in landfill. That's unacceptable.
So we are trying to bury ourselves in filth, particularly in plastics, where plastics takes about 100 years to decompose, I suppose.
Yeah.
Can you attribute the constant or perennial flooding in Ghana to plastics?
Yes, there's been some research that actually, if you look at what happened on June 3rd, some research that was done after the flooding showed that some of the plastic, when you pick the PET, that's a polyethylene terephthalate, they're able to block some drains, and through that, once, water will always seek its path, and once it can't go through the drain, and definitely has to get into the communities. And then we all know the kind of destruction that the June 3rd disaster led to. So plastics actually cause these problems because of these same properties that we are talking about, their durability, the malleability, and all these things that actually benefit us during the usage phase. Once they become waste, these now become negative to us, and that's what we are all discussing today. Yeah. As
a government, I know that we don't have government present on the panel today. We did invite government presence. I think that they would be featured on the next program. But I know that we've had a number of policies. The recent one is in 2020, which is on the National Plastics Policy. And we have a few taxes which have been slapped on. I do not know the intent of it, whether to serve as a deterrent or whatever it is. But I've seen a few documents pointing to efforts by government on this. I think that we can say then that government is doing its part. Will you say it's enough what government is doing?
Honestly, I feel that with the mandates that the government has, they are doing exactly what they are supposed to do, right? And if I were to look at the policy landscape as well as the different frameworks that are emerging around plastics, the government of Ghana is actually being extremely progressive around the issue of plastic management.
All right.
And so the barrier is the implementation of these policies and of these initiatives that we are trying to create through the different frameworks, right? And every part of the value chain needs to come to the table to actually enable these policies and these frameworks to work. And I think this is where we have a gap as a country, and of course, and also funding what needs to happen to change the solid waste management system.
But that's interesting. What exactly is the United Nations Development Program going to contribute to the management of plastic waste in Ghana?
Well, if you look at the UNDP, it's the foremost development organization of the United Nations, and one of the important attributes of the United Nations development program is its convening power, and therefore we are using that to be able to bring all the different stakeholders together to discuss the issues of plastic waste management and how we can collectively find solutions to that. So within that sort of framework, we have what we call the Waste Recovery Platform, which is a platform that brings together all the different stakeholder groups that we have in the management of plastics, including government, the various ministries and departments that have activities related to the waste management and plastics in general. We bring together civil society organizations, even the businesses, the small companies that manage and try to deal with the issue of waste, development partners. And we've been doing this for quite a number of years now. One of the key things that we have been able to achieve out of that is that through that process, we've been able to contribute significantly to the enactment of the national plastics policy that you referred to, but also supporting innovators, small, medium-scale innovators that are trying to do innovative things with plastics and how to manage them. We've been able to give them grants to be able to test these innovations on how they can manage plastic waste in the country.
But that's on the policy angle. Yeah. I would want to know, I know that UNDP is on some platforms that I happen to be a member of, but is it just enough promulgating these policies and still engulfing ourselves or burying ourselves the way we are doing? Is banning plastics the way to go? I would want to start off with Israel.
Okay, well, with respect to banning, I would want to do a global scan. I think if you look at some countries that have actually done that, just about 20% have seen some impact from banning. We know some countries claim they've banned plastics. If you go to Rwanda, but those who have been there have realized that it's not a total ban, which means they look at some fractions of the plastic that are problematic, and then they go about with the ban. And looking at the fact that most of these bans are not working as they have to be, it means we have to look at some other ways of going up, especially in countries like Ghana that are developing countries, where we have issues with enforcement. Once you ban, do you have an alternative material? These are all things that we need to look at so that we just not look at ban as a knee-jerk approach to these things. Once you ban and you don't have alternatives, you don't have a good enforcement system, you realize that through the black market, the plastics also gets into the country. And this is what is happening in most of the countries, especially in developing countries, which are actually looking at the ban. So we believe we have to look beyond the ban and then look at some kind of integrated system where we can look at modern day systems like recycling. And then if it will be a ban, I think what is working is partial bans, and probably that is what we might have to look at.
Are we saying that government's efforts at slapping in some taxes and all of that won't help or can't help?
So Israel completely covered the full scope on why bans are not the answer, right? So let's talk about what the potential answers could be. Earlier on, I mentioned that I feel that the government of Ghana's approach to plastic waste management in terms of the framework and the policies they are putting in place are very progressive. And those policies are built on the concept of a circular economy. So let's touch on what that means. If you think about an economy as we know it, or the system as we know it today, you take materials, you perform some type of process, and then create outputs, which then generate gain. Now, a circular economy actually eliminates the outputs which currently, once you use something and it's no longer of use to you, it becomes waste, which is the topic of discussion today. A circular economy takes that waste and attempts to bring it back as a new raw material.
Okay.
Now, going out of our little space that we are discussing into the broader issue of sustainability, we stand the chance as a human race of, in the future, not being able to meet our needs because we keep tapping into resources that are not renewable. And ultimately, we are going to run out. If it's not our children, it's our children's children or their children.
Yes.
And so circular economy is really the responsible thing to do for everything that we produce today, because there needs to be a way for those materials that we're calling waste to become the resources of the future. And so the government of Ghana has really centered their policy space around managing plastic so that we can bring it back into the loop. And I think that as ambitious as it is really the way to go.
Yes. We are going to take a break here. When we get back, we are going to talk about who is to blame for the situation we find ourselves in. We are not going to blame any particular person, but we are going to talk about individual stakeholder responsibility to how this problem has come up. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Trash Talk. We just left off talking about who is to take the responsibility for the filth we see on our streets in terms of plastics. I want to go to Adwoa again. Adwoa, I want us to talk about the extended producer responsibility and tell us a bit about it globally. I think it's catching up some steam and it has actually come to our shores. Tell us a bit about the APR.
Sure. So extended producer responsibility is a policy instrument that can be used to generate the funding that's necessary for managing plastic waste. Now, when I put it that way, I'm sure everybody says, why don't we just do it then, right? It's quite complex. So first of all, whoever who intends to implement an EPR policy needs to determine who the producer is within this context. Typically, in most EPR systems globally, the producer is either the brand owner. So if you take a bottle and you can clearly see who has branded it or labeled it, that is the person who is responsible. The retailer, so in certain cases, I mean, we know some of our retailers in the market have shop-owned brands that they produce and also sell within their stores. In that case, that is the producer or the responsible person. And then also, if someone imports a material that's packaged in plastic or made of plastic into the country, they are responsible for that under a typical EPR policy. Now, EPR is complex because you need everybody who is liable under the producer definition to register under the policy and pay for each material that they put onto the market. Now, as you can imagine, registering thousands of organizations, tracking how much in volume they are putting into the Ghanaian market, as well as where their materials are ending up to ensure that the money is actually being utilized for the management of their waste is quite a daunting task.
But right? Where then do we start from? Because I see the value chain as not only being the producer's responsibility. Mm-hmm. What would you say about behavioral change and its contribution to the problem that we have here on our hands?
Behavioral change is very, very important, just like you're saying, because at the end of the day, in the middle of all we are talking about is the consumer. If you look at it in terms of numbers, how many people are producing? How many people are consuming? And if you look at waste management or environmental sanitation in general, behavioral change is a very key part of it, because if the people are ready to do what they have to do in terms of their responsibilities, then you have the scenario actually changing. Looking at economies where you have best practice, if you go to Europe and other places where you see people actually segregating and all that, I mean, the bins are there, and you get people putting the waste in the right places. You have bins on the streets and all that. But if you have a situation whereby people are not ready to change behavior, to actually do their part, then you could have the bins, you could have all the EPRs and all that, but the plastics will still get into the environment. That's why it's important that we look at how we can get people to see this problem as something that they need to contribute to, something that they have to play a part with respect to solutions. Otherwise, we might put all the infrastructure there, we might put all the enforcement and all these things, but if the people are not ready to change their behavior, then we'll still be talking about the challenges we are talking about today. So behavior change is very, very important. I think the policy actually talks about it. If you look at the plastic policy that we have in Ghana as one of the strong pillars of the policy. Yeah.
Wonderful. I'm informed that Heather Troutman, who is a consultant, she's been with the World Bank before, or she is a consultant to the World Bank. She's online. Hello, Heather. Hello, Heather.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Heather. You are welcome to Trash Talk. We are sorry for the delay earlier. We are currently talking about the EPR. How are we to implement the EPR in an African setting like Ghana? How easy will it be? What is the EPR? Has it been successfully implemented anywhere in the world?
Yes, so extended producer responsibility is one of the most common tools that are used to enable the financing required to really bootstrap a circular economy framework. And there are many best practices, and some of the first EPRs started back in the 90s. So we have a good amount of kind of institutional know-how from a global perspective. However, there are some unique challenges in a context such as Ghana that need to be taken into careful consideration. And primarily that is that a large percentage of the economy is in the informal sector. And that spans across the entire plastics value chain, from plastics importation, retail, manufacturing, waste management, et cetera. And so, building on the points that Ms. Adwoa raised in needing all of the players to be on board so that it's equitable across the system, that becomes increasingly challenging when a lot of the players are kind of operating in the shadows and we don't exactly know who they are, where they are, or their volumes. But despite that challenge, there are working examples of EPRs for many decades now in similar contexts. So you have in Peru, in Brazil, and several other contexts that I think we can build from and learn from here in Ghana.
Thank you, Heather. I know that you've contributed somewhat to the formulation of our policies, some of our policies on plastics. I would want you to share with us how come we have these laudable policies and yet implementation seems to be a problem?
That's a really hard question to answer. And, it's within the realm of, I think part of the issue is that plastics are what is often termed a fall through the cracks issue, in that it doesn't have a single mandate. Or there's no particular line ministry or any entity that's fully responsible. So if we think about plastics and the necessary policy instruments that we've been looking at, and you can take the example of the plastics policy, which has 17 actions, and those actions, impede on the mandate and jurisdiction of the Ministry of Environment, Science, Technology, and Innovation, but also the Ministry of Sanitation and Water Resources, as well as the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development when we think about waste management at the community level. There's clear impacts on fisheries, fish stocks, fishing communities, so that would be the Ministry of Fisheries. It's got impacts particularly around the EPR topic on the Ministry of Trade and Industry, right? What they're putting on the market, what they're allowed to, the standards, as well as the Ports and Harbor Authority, and it goes on and on and on. And when we think about the infrastructure that we need, if we want to rapidly scale up from the current waste management situation where about 50% or less of waste is really collected and managed at the national level to 100%, that's going to involve the Ministry of Planning, right?
Yes.
And so that's part of the issue, is that the plastics challenge as well as the opportunity is really an all hands on deck issue, that we need all of the different expertise to make it happen. And so the coordination of that is really central and critical. And to date, there's still a lot of ongoing work happening to make that coordination possible.
All right, Heather, thank you. I'm going to move to Kingsley. I mean, the EPR gives a sense of putting the responsibility at the doorstep of the producer. But how fair is it that the producer has to take the responsibility when it's a full value chain, where the producer, the same producer, is paying the regulatory, the statutory taxes, the taxes that they have to pay, they are doing all that they have to do as the obligation towards development. And yet we are saying, or the EPR hints at the producer taking the blame. I want you to tell us, in this value chain, should we be talking about only the producer, or we should look at the bigger picture in this?
No, I think you are right. We need to look at the bigger picture, and that is why I think Adwoa and Heather have mentioned the issue of the target of an EPR system, and we know it is targeted at the producer, but it is only one part of the solution. And I think I agree with the point that Heather made, that this is all hands on deck. It should be a whole society approach, not only one part. So I like the part about producers taking some responsibility in terms of the production and placing of the material into the market. And I think I also like the aspect of the behavioral change, the awareness, the people themselves, the consumers taking responsibility in terms of how they dispose of.
Let me not cut you. I want you to add, as part of your submission, the role of development partners.
Of course, they also play a very significant role in terms of the solution that is available and the comparative analysis, how it has happened in different countries. And of course, if you look, for instance, at UNDP, because we are in 170 countries and territories, analysis of how this has happened in many countries can be brought to bear in terms of the discussion on the issues and how we will be able to help all the different stakeholders to do that. But just to finish, I wanted to look at the issue of the infrastructure that is needed, because I think Israel mentioned the point about awareness and people knowing how to dispose of their waste, but I think it goes way beyond that. So the infrastructure in itself that we have for managing waste, I think is inadequate. For instance, in a typical household, if you asked somebody to separate their plastics from their organic waste, from their paper waste, they would have different bins for doing that, isn't it? And then you would have a waste management company that comes with one truck that puts everything together, because the infrastructure is not built and it's not at that level to be able to accompany the required behavioral change that we want with people. So as much as we are informing people that they need to be responsible and segregate their waste, I think we need also significant effort in the infrastructure that is built for managing this, so that we have different streams being picked up by different trucks and how they are even managed and how they are treated at the end. So I think we should look at a whole society, holistic approach to dealing with the issue of plastic waste.
Thank you, Kingsley. On one of the programs that we are going to have on Trash Talk, we are going to talk about financing waste in Ghana. We are going to go for a break, and when we come back, we'll have parting statements from our panelists. Stay tuned. You're welcome back. It's been a very interesting session here, and time and tide waits for no man. We are going to have our parting comments from our panelists, and I'm going to start with Adwoa. Ladies first, Adwoa.
Okay, so I think in parting, I want to help our viewers to understand the complexity of the plastic value chain and what specifically each part of the value chain could be doing to help to solve this issue we have today. Now, Dow, as mentioned earlier, is a raw material supplier. We make the resins, which are the pellets, which are then given to someone in the value chain called a converter, who turns them into a package for a brand owner or retailer, who fills it with their products before the consumer picks it off the shelf or in the market or wherever that the products are sold. Now, when you consider the role of each of these players along the value chain, there's something that can be done, and I'll speak specifically to Dow and our position in the space. We work with our first and second level of the value chain, so the converters and the brand owners, to design packaging that is made to be recyclable or sustainable. Because honestly, all the conversations we've had here today around the barriers to collection, EPR, all of those will be in vain if the package right from the start is not designed to be recycled. It will still end up in the landfill or in environment. And so that's a key part of what we are doing as a company, putting our material science expertise to make packages that can actually be recycled. Now, the second part then is mechanical recycling or the recycling technologies. And so we're investing a significant amount of money with partners globally to be able to create that infrastructure to recover the plastic materials that are of interest to us and convert them into new raw materials as part of this circular economy that we discussed. Of course, we also work with partners to support reuse and refill models. How can we make packages that can be reused and refilled so that we don't have them ending up in the waste value chain? Within Ghana, most producers do not manufacture here. And I think that's something that we need to put out, that the raw materials that are used to make plastic are imported into the market. None of them are manufactured here. And so in being able to tackle the issue, Dow has looked within the landscape and figured out a number of ways we can do it. The first point is that we know we can't do it by ourselves, and so collaboration is key. In 2017, we worked with 7 other large companies to form an organization called the Ghana Recycling Initiative by Private Enterprises. And I dare say that this is almost a voluntary EPR system of sorts, because all of the companies within that specific association pay dues, which are utilized in plastic waste projects, which have impacted the landscape in Ghana. Additionally, we have set aside grant funding, which year on year is fed into local entrepreneurs or local companies that are doing something in the plastic waste space. So namely, in 2018, we funded an initiative called Cash It, which was meant to be a plastic valorization center, or a place where we would give plastic waste value so that it could end up in recycling systems. This was done in collaboration with the Asasi Foundation, and now Cash It is a full-scale mechanical recycling facility in Ghana that is running and has been supported by several other initiatives.
Okay, Adwoa, I like the collaborative part that you've brought in. Yeah. I would want to have the take of UNDP and what you're also doing to help the situation of plastics in Ghana.
And I think I would pick up from where Adwoa left in terms of the solutions. So I mentioned that as part of our work on the waste recovery platform, we have been able to advance so far several thousands of dollars to innovators. So very bright young people who are trying solutions to manage the waste. And some of those solutions range from using plastics together with other materials for production of bricks and all that for building, to the collection, recycling of plastic. So we have been able to advance those resources to our innovators through our Waste Recovery Innovation Challenge, which has been one of the significant contributions that we've made to the system. But of course, beyond that, as I mentioned, UNDP, in terms of the work that we do, we are a convener, so we are able to bring all these different actors together to look at the different solutions, to offer those solutions to government and to the different entities that are able to work with them. So significantly, that is what we are able to bring on board in terms of our convening power and space.
Thank you. We are going to end on the note of the researchers. Could you give us your last statement, Africa Environmental Sanitation Consult people, and what your position is on plastics and plastic waste management in Ghana?
Thank you very much. I'm happy that the researchers have to end this because throughout the conversation, realize that we've been churning out a lot of data, but most of them, in terms of reference, might even come from outside. But then we are clear that plastics came in to help us as human beings. The only problem we're having with plastics is the fact that at the end of life, we find challenges. But then we've also proposed very good solutions like the circular economy. I personally love that because it looks at managing plastic right from the design stage. So when you are designing the product, that is where you have to think of the recycling. And then one of the strategies that is quite different from all other environmental strategies is the circularity, where you have cascades. The idea is use the material several times so that you can expand its shelf life before it gets into the bin. And then research is very, very important. We need to look at it. We don't only have to look for data when we have to do something just to support. We need to invest in research so that we can have the data in Ghana. I mean, sometimes the battle we are fighting with plastic looks like you fighting with an enemy that you don't know because everything is estimations. Maybe the 1,800,000 we are talking about might not be true. But then we are looking for investment. We are looking for solutions. And most of the investors are asking, are you sure you have this 1 million tons there? Because these are all estimations. Yeah. Why should I put in my money? So research is very, very important. And I also want to state that we need to start small. I remember we had a conversation with the EPR in Kenya. They just started with about 50 companies or so. And they're making progress over the last 2 years. So we need to start very small because sometimes the ideas are very huge. People are talking about things that are actually being done in much developed economies. These things need a lot of investment. They need some accompanying policies and legislature to make these things work. We are not there yet, but I believe we can start from somewhere. What from research we think is not good is the burning, and then the dumping, and then the indiscriminate disposal. We have local solutions. I think private sector in the country has a number of solutions. Adwoa mentioned one. I can mention a few companies that are doing stuff with these things. But one problem is the fact that the value you get from plastic mostly is not enough to take care of the end of life. That's why we need the sustainable funding and all the other things to do this. So these are my concluding statement with respect to research.
Thank you. I left the last slot for Heather Troutman. And Heather, we haven't forgotten about you. Heather, tell us your position. These are your last statements on the plastics and plastic waste issue in Ghana.
Thank you very much. I think all of the panelists have each said a piece of what I would like to highlight, and that is we need to act, and we need to act now. So we can start small. We can start with what we've got. And we need to research and plan and have data, but we also need to act with the information that we have and gain experience as we're moving forward. We also need to collaborate and work together. None of us are going to do it alone, not as an individual organization, not as an individual component of the value chain, and not as an individual sector. So we need collaboration between the public, private, civil society, and international partners to get this done. And we really need to be focused, building on Israel's point with data. We need to understand the targets that we're reaching for. We need to measure our progress. We need to see if what we're doing is really having impact. And if it's not, we need to reiterate and redesign. But the final line is there is hope. The problem is big and we see it every day, so we can't overlook that. But there are a lot of solutions happening on the ground. There's a lot of interest and enthusiasm, and we can solve this. And so in 5 years from now and 10 years from now, Ghana's really going to have its place on the global map on what it's doing, what it has done to address the plastic pollution problem, and everyone's invited. So please kind of join with us and let's get this done.
Thank you very much, Heather. Panelists, it's been an interesting session. I want to conclude on something that Heather said. We need to act, and we need to act now. The time to act is now. So on the next episode of Trash Talk, we are going to demonstrate to you the work that some amazing entrepreneurs in Ghana have done with plastics. The situation is not as bad as it's been described or as we see it on the ground. There is some hope, but we must act now. I want to say thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And then we'll call you back when we need you on our program again. Thank you very much. Stay tuned for the next episode.